Oh, it didn't turn on. Sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. I call Committee of Supplies Section A to order. We're meeting today to continue the consideration of the estimates of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. I now recognize the Minister to move the vote.
Thank you very much, Chair. Resolved that a sum not exceeding $312,344,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, Ministry operations to 31st March 2023.
Thank you, Minister. I now recognize the member for Kelowna Mission.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. So today we're going to start off with some agriculture questions. Obviously, looking at greenhouse gas emissions, agriculture is listed as one of the contributory affects. But in delving into the Clean BC plan as well as the Roadmap 2030, I don't see as much attention on agriculture as some of the other aspects of industries or society. Could the minister, through the chair, describe how emissions are being lowered in agriculture?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to the member for the question. It's an important question. I think the agricultural sector is a sector where we want to work with the industry to reduce emissions. I'm going to start with some of the projects that we've supported through the Clean BC program for industry. In 2020, we had two projects. We had more than two, but I'm going to highlight two. One of them was Village Farms in Delta, and their operation will remove impurities and liquefy carbon dioxide extracted from the gas captured at the Vancouver landfill. This carbon dioxide will displace the carbon dioxide that is currently produced by the greenhouse's natural gas boilers. Carbon dioxide, of course, is essential for plants. The natural gas is used for heating the greenhouses, in part because the carbon dioxide is necessary. If you replace the carbon dioxide, then it opens the possibility for other sources of heat, while at the same time providing the recaptured carbon dioxide for the plants. Another example is Windset Farms in Delta, which installed thermal curtains at its operations, and that results in improved energy efficiency and a reduction in the amount of natural gas that's being consumed. And of course, in the Clean BC program for industry, we will be working with the industry to find and identify new projects that could be co-funded by the particular industrial operators and our government through the Clean BC program for industry. And that will, of course, help reduce emissions overall. If I refer the member to page 59 of the roadmap for 2030 booklet, we show an example of the development of a range of technologies in agriculture, aquaculture, and fisheries to reduce emissions. Some of the key activities will be supporting GHG efficient practices, enhancing agricultural carbon sequestration, seizing the potential of regenerative agriculture, exploring the potential for seaweed agriculture to sequester carbon, supporting increased on-farm efficiencies and fuel switching, and anaerobic digesters for biogas production. Having said that, I want to acknowledge that the range of measures in the sector are still emerging. We show on page 59 there's emergent issues, there's early deployment, and we intend to have these measures I just outlined in early deployment by 2030. Then there's further development that brings them to market maturity, and in this sector that will take place over time and extend beyond 2030. And the reason for this is we want to ensure, because the cost and economic viability of a number of these measures is still quite high. It's in its early phase, and of course the agriculture sector, besides being an important source of exports for British Columbia, also feeds British Columbians. And in this time of great concern about the costs of foods, we don't want to push the cost higher in the short term. We want to help the industry get these new technologies to market maturity and lower cost, so that we're reducing emissions without adding to the cost burden of food production and food purchasing for British Columbians.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I agree wholeheartedly with the Minister that this is about food security. I also agree that there is some level of urgency in terms of GHG reductions and supporting industry in doing so. As we also know, the agricultural industry has been going up over the course of the last 3 years of numbers. So we see that there's certainly their energy usage has been going up. The Clean BC Energy Fund that the Minister spoke of actually requires a 10,000 ton usage before application to that fund, as we canvassed earlier in estimates last week. Could the Minister please describe which Clean BC funding is available for a farmer, a rancher, or a fishery to decarbonize agriculture if they don't meet that 10,000 ton threshold?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. We, of course, in this phase of Clean BC are focusing the Clean BC program for industry and the Industry Fund on industries that emit over 10,000 tons for what I hope is the obvious reason that we want to make deep reductions where there are significant emissions early in order to assist with the targets, which is not to say that the attempts of other industries to reduce emissions and therefore pay less carbon tax is not important. So that is why Budget 2022 includes $15 million over 3 years in support for sustainable and climate resilient agricultural practices under the Beneficial Management Practices program. Under this program, projects can get funded up for 100% of up to $70,000 for operations. To give an example, one of the envelopes is very specifically for greenhouse gas emission reduction initiatives. There's also envelopes for improving air quality, for ecological enhancements, and also for preparedness and adaptation strategies for agricultural operators to respond to a changing climate. In addition to that, agricultural operators within the industry are eligible for a range of small business programs that are available to other industries as well. I'll give one example, but there are many others of the Specialty Use Vehicle Incentive Program under the Clean BC Go Electric program supports small businesses everywhere with grants and rebates to be able to adopt cleaner or zero-emission vehicles to replace the fossil fuel-driven vehicles and equipment they now have.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. So the $5 million or $15 million that Clean BC currently has over the course of 3 years or three budget cycles, over that $15 million actually is broken down into $0.176 million, which is an increase for salary and benefits, and a $4.824 million for operational expenditures. The information that the minister just gave in terms of what that the actual reduction of GHG emissions and the grants of up to 70 million, what percentage or what number inside of that 4.824 million would be reflected in the number that was just given on actual projects for GHG lowering?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And I think the member said 70 projects up to 70 million, but I'm sure meant 70,000. And I want to, the best way for me to answer the question is to state that my ministry and the Climate Action Secretariat develops the policies and modeling for a range of initiatives that make up our efforts to meet our legislated greenhouse gas reduction targets. But the programs are largely administered by other ministries. And so in the case of the beneficial management program that is administered by the Ministry of Agriculture. So I would be speculating if I gave an exact percentage in answer to the member's question. What I can say is that the program is jointly administered by the Ministry of Agriculture in British Columbia, Canada, the federal government, and the Canadian Agricultural Partnership.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Food security is incredibly important. So is the cost of living. And right now, we have our food costs escalating at an exorbitant amount. And so I understand that there's a delicate balance between what we ask or require of our industries and at the same time, the additional costs that are put onto them. Understanding that Clean BC is a policy document and hopefully a framework for legislation. Right now, the Ministry of Agriculture, which is identified as one of the larger uses of both energy as well as an emitter, right now there is no grant that would help a farmer actually buy technology like better irrigation. There is no grant program that would actually allow a poultry farmer, let's say, barn heating or cooling, or to upgrade their barn heating and cooling. Could the minister please describe how, through policy and legislation, the intention is to reduce the emissions created by agriculture?
Minister.
Okay, remaster this trick. I haven't been wearing my glasses for a while. Thank you very much, Chair. And to the member, on the contrary, the member used an example of a poultry farmer and what can they do to make their barns more energy efficient, as well as reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And in fact, there is a broad suite of incentives administered by Energy Mines, Low Carbon Innovation, BC Hydro, and Fortis for building energy improvement and energy efficiency. There's a number of incentives under a program that's called Better Homes, Better Buildings, which is a broad umbrella. What we are trying to do is look at the most cost-effective measures that can be implemented first, and so that is our general approach to this. I mentioned previously in answer to the other question from the member, the special use vehicle incentive program that is focused on operators that don't qualify for the Clean BC program for industry. We also support the agriculture industry, I think, in some very significant ways through the climate preparedness and adaptation strategy and the programs that flow from that through Emergency Management BC and other ministries. I don't think there is an agricultural operator in the province, and particularly not in the Fraser Valley, that would not say that after the impacts of the atmospheric rivers and the flooding and the impacts that different elements of the agricultural sector are seeing from unpredictable weather, whether it's heat or droughts, that we don't need to address climate change. And we don't need to address it both from a mitigation standpoint to reduce emissions, because we know that BC can't control climate change on our own, but we certainly have a role to play in it. But very importantly from the perspective of climate preparedness and adaptation measures that can help them make their practices and their operations more resilient to a changing climate, as well as recovering from the kinds of disasters that we saw last year. So we are focusing on that, as well as focusing on a suite of programs in both transportation, in mechanization, and in building energy efficiency that are administered and available for many small businesses, including agriculture.
Member.
Thank you so much, Honourable Chair. As farm cash receipts actually went down in 2020, the Ministry of Agriculture obviously isn't trumpeting, farm operating expenses after rebates. Because according to Stats Canada, they've been actually increasing since 2018. What is the minister's position on carbon tax for farming and ranching?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask the member to be a bit more specific in the question?
Member.
Thank you so much. Certainly. So as we know, costs are going up. They are not necessarily making more money, but it is costing the British Columbians more to eat. So one of those costs is carbon tax and fuel tax. What is the minister's position on the carbon tax for farming and ranching? And will there be carbon tax relief for greenhouse growers this year?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the carbon tax relief grant program for greenhouse growers that has been in place for a number of years continues. Applications are open from April 19th, 2022 to May 31st, 2022 to cover the 2021 tax year, and the relief grants are available to operators that had greater than $20,000 in goods sales, used gas or propane to heat their greenhouses, and had a production area greater than 455 square meters.
Member.
Thank you so much, Honourable Chair. So through the Chair to the Minister, does the Minister support the new fossil fuel tax from Budget 2022? And does the fossil fuel tax credit apply to farm equipment?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask the member to clarify, I'm assuming that the member is referring to the fuel tax and not the carbon tax, but I'm not aware of a tax specifically called fossil fuel tax.
Member.
Correct, fuel tax.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And I think, as the member would appreciate, I'm a member of the Executive Council. I'm a member of government. Tax policy comes from our government, is supported by our government, and I support all of the policy measures contained in it. But to give a bit of context to that, the increase to which the member refers is intended to reflect the true cost of the use of fossil fuels and all of the externalities that we saw very clearly last year, whether it was heat, flooding, drought, and taxpayers are paying for the supports that go to communities that were devastated, as well as to agriculture and other operators that were devastated. There is no escaping the costs of these things. So that tax policy is designed to reflect the externalities and at the same time incent people to move toward heat pump and other electric-based forms of heating that are more efficient, that reduce emissions, for which we provide rebates, and for which we've exempted, in the case of heat pumps, from the PST, all of which is to encourage and assist with a shift to a form of heating and cooling that is ultimately more efficient, and less costly.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I echo the minister's tension and attempt at trying to incent in some way, shape, or form, either through cost, et cetera, the agricultural industry to move to lower emission technology. On the other hand, we just went through an exercise in which I asked which grant programs were available, and there's very few and they're very small. If you look at, let's take for example, a grain grower, which my family were grain growers for years, still are, up in northern Alberta. Grain growers use propane dryers with BTUs in the millions because their product is actually going to things like bread, noodles, etc. In this tension that the minister has just described, how does a farmer actually make that transition while still trying to stay alive and not simply push those costs to the end user, which ends up being British Columbians with food costs skyrocketing?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the member. There are a number of exemptions for the agricultural industry with respect to fuels from the carbon tax. For instance, colored gas and diesel that is used by farmers for certain purposes like tractors off-highway, industrial machines and machinery, and there's also PST exemptions for select machinery and equipment. So these are examples of both exemptions and supports to other parts of the tax system for the agricultural industry, in addition to the rebates and programs that I've mentioned already that are in existence, and the ones that we intend to continue to develop in consultation with the agricultural industry and help them apply, and the supports we know we will need to continue to offer as we ramp up emission reduction technologies and therefore reduce the cost of them in the future years.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So part of climate change strategy is that resilience that we were speaking of earlier, and the costs when we've devastated certain amounts of farmlands. And as agricultural lands are premium sources of potential carbon capture if managed correctly. So I'm going to go through a number of different aspects that have not yet been answered. So I've particularly omitted the ones that have already been answered. But how does the $1.2 billion in the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategies budget support rebates for crop farmers for environmentally conscious irrigation equipment?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, I want to clarify for the member that while there is $1.2 billion in the budget for this 3-year fiscal plan for Clean BC programs, it's not a $1.2 billion budget administered by my ministry. It's spread across multiple ministries for a variety of programs. So specifically with respect to environmentally conscious irrigation programs, there are some that are part of the Ministry of Agriculture Beneficial Management Program, and that's the ministry that administers programs for agricultural operators with respect to irrigation, and I would respectfully refer the member to ask that question of the ministry. Alternatively, we can ask the ministry and reply in writing, but we're not administering that program, so I can't provide that answer today.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I think that what the minister's answer right there kind of hit the nail on the head. You see, we actually did canvass all of these questions in the Ministry of Agriculture. She actually referred us back here to you. So there is a little bit of, in fact, the Better Buildings fund that the minister answered earlier, the Ministry of Agriculture was unaware of. So I think one of my queries or one of my questions next is going to be, the minister had indicated, we hope that those that are in the agricultural industry use these different programs that are out there. I would ask, how easily accessible are these programs, and does the agricultural industry understand that these are at their disposal and to be used?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the member for the question, because it gives me the opportunity to highlight some of the work that we're undertaking to make access to the programs better. First of all, in response to the question that the member asked about environmentally conscious or sustainable irrigation practices, given that the Ministry of Agriculture has completed its estimates, I'd be happy to look for the answer to the member's question and provide it. The member highlights an important point. We are currently in the process of consultation with the public and with industry groups on how we can create a single window approach to accessibility to government programs in energy efficiency across the board. The agricultural sector is working with us. They're represented on our industry working group. As I mentioned previously, we have had some success in ensuring that members of the industry are aware of the opportunity for programs that are administered by my ministry through the Clean BC program for industry. We've had 3 successful projects undertaken so far, but more importantly, I think if we want to be successful in getting broad take-up, whether it's among families and individuals, for private residences, or for personal transportation, be it public or personal vehicle, if we want significant uptake by industry for energy efficiency and emission reduction in transportation and buildings and in practices, we need to ensure that that people are aware of where to go to get the answer to their question and not feel like they are going to go through some sort of a wheel of fortune to process to find out where the program is, and we've recognized that, and we're working to do that as quickly as we can.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So I'm going to read these into record, and I don't expect an answer back right now. In fact, I'd prefer to have an answer back just in writing, and actually it would help us get that word out and get the message out. Because as the Minister has indicated, it is incredibly frustrating for these farmers and the farm community to try and ascertain how they can best go about making themselves more competitive for both food security here and making sure that we have the lowest cost providers for all of British Columbians, but also to make sure that they're still remaining competitive on a global scale. You know, if I just compare Chile, who competes with us on fish, on seafood, on meat products, as well as dairy, some fresh fruit, etc. They currently have $5 a ton on carbon tax, whereas we have 50 and going up. What happens when we're 170 and trying to compete on a global market? So my question through the chair to the minister is this: what rebates or programs are available? And I'm going to list all of them: poultry farmers for barn heating or cooling, crop farmers for environmentally conscious irrigation equipment, what rebates or programs are available for nutrient management infrastructure, what rebates or programs are available for pest management, what rebates or programs are available for soil management, what rebates or programs are available for biodiversity, and what rebates or programs are available for air quality. Currently, these are areas in which the agricultural industry is seeing pressure in terms of their costs going up and a shrinking margin, but not seeing the same relief. And I'll just go back to and make one further statement, and then I'll ask my last question in this area. I hope my last question. If you give me a great answer, Minister, it'll be the last question. But we know that farmers and ranchers and our fishermen, our fishers, operate environmentally aware businesses. They want to be more efficient. They want to do the right thing for British Columbians, and they came firsthand and front and center with the devastation from last year. So I think there is an opportunity, a window of opportunity in which we can really take to heart and see how we can move that dial forward. My last question is this: each of the programs that you've mentioned, or that the minister has mentioned so far, are kind of embedded into different areas here. And looking at the roadmap and understanding what some of the initiatives that were located on the agriculture page, they are sort of embedded inside of each of these emissions targets. My question through the chair to the minister is this: each of these programs in the roadmap have various targets. How much does the minister anticipate agriculture to lower by in this next calendar year?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So here's my attempt at a really great answer for the member, and then we can move on to other questions. But I want to preface my answer by saying that I appreciate that the member has clearly spent a lot of time looking at the roadmap for 2030. You've been doing that, obviously, or she's been doing that, obviously, to hold government accountable and ask some important questions. But I think from the member's opening comments, it's also from interest in the issue and the importance of government and all of us tackling climate change. So I am heartened and expect that the member will also be spreading the word and helping us spread the word about what government is trying to do on behalf of all of us, and I think the entire legislature wants to do to reduce emissions and fight climate change. With respect to the member's specific question, we don't do year-over-year forecasting, but what I can tell the member is that the projection that we have for 2030 is without any of the measures in Clean BC, emissions would be 3.0 megatons, and with the measures that we have outlined that we intend to implement and are implementing, emissions will be 2.5 megatons, or a reduction of half a megaton. Now, to give that some context, agricultural emissions account for 4% of BC's overall emissions. So it's significant, but it's not a huge amount. But it's also an extremely hard to decarbonize sector, and which is another way of saying that the cost per ton of emission reductions in the agricultural sector is more than the cost per ton in other sectors where in fact there's a much more significant carbon footprint. So we will continue to work to reduce carbon emissions in the agricultural sector and work with the sector to do it in ways that ultimately make their operations more efficient and less costly. But we are also doing this with a view to not adding significantly to the costs of the sector without finding ways to ameliorate those costs, because we do not want to make our sector uncompetitive, and we do not want to further drive up the cost of food and therefore food security for British Columbians.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Minister. That was simply brilliant answer. I don't know if I could rave any more than that, but it's definitely encouraging and very specific, so thank you for that as well. We're going to move now into the forestry sector and emissions created by the forestry sector. Opening up in a first question and through the chair to the minister, what is the minister's estimate for emissions from the forestry sector to date?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome. And to the member's question, I will give the most significant sources. Deforestation accounts for 2.94 megatons in the most recent inventory, and for stationary and moving emissions from transportation. Now, this is both the forestry and agriculture sectors together. We don't have them disaggregated. 1.4 megatons.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and welcome. So through the chair to the minister, would this include slash burning and all hauling, transportation, and harvesting?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And with respect to whether that includes all operations like falling and use of chainsaws, use of fuel-driven machines to yard timber out of the woods, we assume that the number I gave for stationary and mobile transportation covers all of that because it covers all of the fuel purchased by the operations, but we will confirm that, and if there is a different answer, provide it to the member. The emissions for slash burning are 3.8 megatons, obviously quite high, and that is why a big focus of the Clean BC plan and the roadmap to 2030, and one of the pathways is the bioeconomy, because if we can find good economic use for what is otherwise left on the ground or burned, then we're both reducing emissions and creating new economic opportunities.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So with your permission, Minister, I'd love to go back to that particular item, the slash burning, in just a little bit. I just want a few more clarifying questions before we go there. Through the chair to the minister, does the minister factor in the erosion of landscape from forestry practices? If so, how is that factored in? And is that a part of climate change strategy?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And I assume that the member's question refers specifically to emissions from erosion. And so in that case, we have on our website, as part of the emissions inventory, quite a bit of detail on the different sources of erosion, the different sources of emission associated with with forestry in general, but the numbers we use come from Environment and Climate Change Canada, and to find out exactly where and how they factor erosion in, or the impacts from erosion, or if they're factored in deforestation generally, we need to check back with them, so we'll add it to the list.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So through the chair to the minister, does the minister see the forest fires and floods that resulted last year as resulting from forestry practices, somewhat from forestry practices, or from climate change in general?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to be careful with my answer because I'm not a scientist or a climate scientist. I think we want to defer to the opinion of scientists and experts in this who say that there are a number of contributing factors, and it's very difficult to attribute a specific point in time event to climate change or another factor, but in aggregate, overall, climate change, extreme heat and drought that flow from climate change are contributing factors to forest fires.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And you know, to the minister, you know, just to be fair, it wasn't a trick question. There was no landmine that was about to be jumped into. My question was actually from the perspective of how the roadmap comes at you know, articulating those emissions and then trying to actually see them reduced. And so it was more to say, is this something that we're going to see in climate change strategy? Is this something that we're going to be seeing within actual emissions and industry fund or funding to try and get those emissions lowered? Or is this something that we're going to be seeing in the forestry practices guidelines and the evolution of those practice guidelines moving forward?
Minister.
Much, Chair, and to the member, we don't include emissions from wildfires in our BC provincial emissions inventory, and the reason we don't is it is international standard not to include those. They're considered force majeure and beyond control. Having said that, however, obviously, we don't want to treat the risk of wildfire as something beyond our control. So the overall budget envelope for climate preparedness and response includes $90 million for wildfire fuel management and fire smart programs, $98 million for the BC Wildfire Service to advance cultural and prescribed burning and other wildfire mitigation policies and actions, and of course the BC Wildfire Service is now being made a year-round service. In addition to that, what is within the budget for my ministry and the Climate Preparedness and Adaptation Strategy is money that's dedicated to collecting data and working on modeling of wildfire, among other climate caused risks, to better assist other ministries in planning and taking action to prevent the risks of wildfire.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So through the chair to the minister, so of the 1.2 billion in the next three budgets, the 90 million, 98 million, and the dollar figure for the BC wildfire is part of that 1.2 million or is not articulated in the 1.2?
Oh, sorry, Minister.
Thank you, Chair. It is not part of the 1.2 for implementation of the Clean BC roadmap. It is part of the $2.1 billion that is dedicated to disaster response and recovery. Includes the funding for climate preparedness and adaptation strategy, which was the data and modeling that I mentioned. It does include the BC Wildfire Service and the 90 and 98 million that I mentioned.
Member.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So the CO2 released in the 2017 and 2018 fires totaled about 3 times the total emissions from their respective year of all of BC. That includes our oil and gas sector, includes our agricultural sector, which we've just talked about, et cetera, et cetera. Assumptions are that 2021 would be the same. The costs of these forest fires are quite dramatic when we think about the health costs and the new studies that have just come out of California in terms of the health costs, the mental health costs, the costs to citizens as well as to industries like tourism, et cetera. How is the Ministry of Environment actually tackling some of those aspects of issue and need, irregardless of the international standard that's in place where we don't calculate those into our yearly totals?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. And the member's correct. There are international standards that at the current time don't account for emissions by force majeure like wildfire, but the climate change doesn't particularly care whether we count them or not. They're going into the atmosphere. They're they're intense, they're severe, and they have impact. So that is exactly why we are spending the money on the BC Wildfire Service and on cultural and prescribed burning and other mitigation measures, and on supporting local communities with fuel management and other measures through Fire Smart to reduce the risk of fire, and why we know we need to focus on that.
Member.
So much, Madam Chair. Through the chair to the minister, the $90 million that's in wildfire fuel mitigation that the minister just referenced again, that was, if I go back to earlier, we are actually talking about the forestry industry lessening its slash burning and actually going to a biofuels waste management or zero waste management and utilizing some of those products in other ways. Is there any attempt in that $90 million for the fuel mitigation to actually do the same?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And to the member, this is, I think, a good example of the interrelationship and crossover between mitigation measures as well as preparedness and adaptation measures. The mitigation measures being part of the Clean BC Roadmap, $1.2 billion across government, and the climate preparedness and adaptation and emergency response, disaster recovery being part of the $2.1 billion. In the programs that I mentioned earlier, whether it's Fire Smart, fuel management, BC Wildfire Service, as well as measures to better manage risk to forest fire, by doing that, to reduce the risk of fire and therefore the risk of further emissions, we also create economic opportunity in the forest bioeconomy, which some of the work on developing those opportunities is a part of the Clean BC Roadmap, $1.2 billion, specifically $22 million to cover both advantages or opportunities for forest carbon sequestration as well as the Indigenous Bioeconomy Program. So utilizing wood waste and fuels that might otherwise enhance or intensify the risk of wildfires, provides stock that can be used for renewable natural gas and even hydrogen, as well as other opportunities in the forest bioeconomy.
Member.
Thank you so much, Chair. Nice to see you here. Welcome. So going back to 2008, our average firefighting cost has been $301 million per year. But that, if we really look at the last 5 years under this administration, we're looking at in 2020, which was not a fire year, it was just under $200 million. But in 2021, when we did fight a fire fires of many magnitude, that number was almost $600 million. So my question through the chair to the minister is that if we've got orders of magnitude of in the hundreds of millions of dollars, are we spending enough on wildfire prevention?
Minister.
Keep getting trapped by my mask here. Thank you, Chair. And with respect to the member, the responsibility for overall wildfire prevention activities, including the programs that I mentioned earlier as part of the overall pan-government approach to fighting the risks of climate change, adapting and preparing for climate change, as well as disaster recovery. Wildfire specifically is in the mandate of the Minister of Forests, and that is the appropriate place to ask that question.
Member.
So much, Chair, and will do so. Thank you to the minister. So with respect to these numbers, however, the numbers that we previously talked about, the 3.8 megatons for slash burning, the 1.4 megatons for transportation, and the 2.94 megatons for the deforestation, those numbers are calculated in the Roadmap 2030 as we earlier canvassed. So would those numbers not also be under the Ministry of Environment's, policy and legislative authority to actually see reductions in emissions too?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm hoping this is a helpful answer to the member. The role of my ministry and the Climate Action Secretariat is to is to set targets, to collect data and apply the lessons from that data with respect to mitigating climate change, as well as helping with our climate preparedness and adaptation strategies. And it's also to develop the policies that then form part of a all-of-government approach to fighting climate change. So are we then responsible for administering the particular programs to meet a specific policy? No, we're not, although we do report on the successes or lack of success of those specific policies that we commit as government to implementing as part of the Climate Change Accountability Report annually.
Member.
Thank you so much, Chair. And with all due respect to the minister, I mean, we've just canvassed how devastating the impact is of forest fires. So understanding that the Ministry of Environment is all about setting targets, collecting data, adaptation and strategy, and then creating policies, what policies is the ministry going to set with respect to Forest fires.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And to the member, the answer to that question would be found in the role of our ministry in developing a preparedness and adaptation strategy. So with respect to fuels management, to fire smart practices, to cultural and prescribed burning, all of which would be part and are part of a sound climate preparedness strategy. We would consult and advise on development of those policies as part of a pan-government approach to managing the risk of wildfire, which would, at the same time, reduce the emissions from wildfire, despite the fact that they're not counted by any government in the world with respect to greenhouse gas emission inventory. As we've already canvassed, it is important to do everything we can to protect the forest, to protect communities, and to reduce emissions from wildfire.
Member.
Thank you so much, Chair. So with respect to the climate preparedness strategy, in preparation for these estimates, I went back and reviewed the last 4 years of estimates. The fourth year, I think you and the member from Kamloops North might have had some sort of a 40-hour debate, which was riveting, but I did peter off at some points there. But with respect to last year, I entered my review with an amazing curiosity because of the events of last year that took place almost directly after these the House would have risen for the summer. And there was a similar answer given in that the climate preparedness strategy was going to plan and prepare for such events, et cetera. Could the minister please enlighten me as to what changed last year or what changed this year with respect to that climate preparedness strategy with respect to the events of last year?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think the most significant change from 2021 to 2022 is establishing a year-round wildfire service. That is a significant change from decades of practice in British Columbia. Another obvious change was in 2021, we had $6 million budgeted for a single year for the climate preparedness and adaptation strategy, and in 2022, the budget for the 3-year fiscal period is another $84 million. Also, we have $145 million in new funding to strengthen BC's emergency management and wildfire services. I've mentioned the year-round workforce. There's additional resources to improve the public alerting system for wildfires and to better support people and communities during climate-related events. An additional $98 million over the 3-year fiscal plan will fund wildfire prevention work and maintain Forest Service roads that are used to respond to forest fires more quickly. $210 million is dedicated to support community climate change preparedness and emergency management. As I mentioned previously, the Fire Smart program, the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, Indigenous-led emergency management priorities, supporting and communities and First Nations for a range of risk reduction activities, not all of which relate to fire, but many of which do.
Member.
Thank you so much, Chair. Through the Chair to the Minister, are we going to see some form of articulation of forest fire emissions somewhere in the roadmap 2030, even if it's got an asterisk and says is not included in the overall because of international standards? Are we going to see some sort of articulation of it so that we can track it as a society and have it part of our accountability report?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And the annual provincial emissions inventory does include emissions from forest fires in the form of a memo. It's noted that they're not counted, but they are included. And then the accountability report refers to the annual BC emissions inventory report.
Member.
Okay, thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to the Minister for the answer. I guess I was hoping that it would be somewhere located on the report so that you wouldn't have to see it on the report and go to the emissions inventory. I'm going to kind of do a subsection here under forestry. Because last year in the estimates, the minister said, and I'll quote, "We're guarding BC's incredible biodiversity and natural habitats," end quote. Could the minister describe how the use of glyphosate in the forestry sector adds to guarding biodiversity?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. As the member will know, lead responsibility for biodiversity was shifted from my ministry to the Ministry of Land, Water and Resource Stewardship, effective April 1st. In other words, coincident with this budget. So that's a question that should go to that ministry.
Member.
Thank you so much, Chair. So I'll ask it maybe in a different way that hopefully will come under the purview of the Ministry of Environment. So does the minister see the use of glyphosate in the forestry sector as contributory to a reduction in the ecosystem?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And the responsibility of my ministry since April 1st with respect to the application of glyphosate or any other herbicides or pesticides is restricted to impacts on human health and safety and impacts on ecosystem services and biodiversity fall in the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Land, Water and Resource Stewardship.
Member.
Sorry, just to clarify, thank you, Chair. The minister just referred to it as if it's health, if it's biodiversity, or if it's ecosystem, it's all under Ministry of Land?
Human
Minister.
health is under my ministry. Direct impacts on human health, impacts on biodiversity and ecosystems would be land, water, and resource stewardship.
Member.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for the clarification. So let's talk about then human health with respect to glyphosate. Obviously, the scientific journals are chock full of the health aspects of everything from generational toxicology to sperm implementations, et cetera. So with respect to glyphosate and the use of glyphosate and the use of glyphosate in our forestry industry and how it contributes to a loss of habitat, how it gets into our watershed, and how it affects our overall health. Does the minister believe that glyphosate is good for the environment and for our human health?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And the questions that the member is now asking me relate to the Environmental Protection Division. So I just want to clarify whether the member has now moved on from climate-related questions, or if the staff from the Climate Action Secretariat should just be on standby for a few minutes, and then Chair, perhaps after the member answers that question, we could take a short recess.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And no, I will be going back to climate change afterwards.
We will now take a brief recess. I call Committee of Supply Section A back to order. We are currently considering the budget estimates of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. I now recognize the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So in answer to the member's question, as I previously said, I'm neither a scientist nor a medical doctor, and the way the ministry works, my ministry works, is we rely on reviews by Health Canada of whether a pesticide is safe or has a negative impact of human health or not. Health Canada, as current opinion, is that glyphosate is safe when used properly, and that's supported by bodies in both the United States and Europe. We regularly in our ministry review science, and if we see evidence that we think should be considered, we consult with Health Canada again. Our role is to ensure that pesticides that are approved for use are applied properly by properly certified applicators in proper ways in the context of an overall integrated pest management plan. But what I can inform the member is that the Ministry of Health is undertaking a review whether they see a human health impact from consuming products that may have been sprayed or may have been subject to incidental contact or overspray with glyphosate. Integrated pest management staff in my ministry, along with staff from the Ministry of Forests and Invasive Species Working Group, are working and monitoring this work by the Ministry of Health as it goes on.
Member.
Thank you so much, Chair. And thank you to the Minister for that answer. I'll harken back to some of the previous conversations that the Minister and I have been having, in which we've talked about some of the, yes, direct aspects of the Ministry of Environment, but then also some of the indirect aspects of the Ministry of Environment's purview. And while I think that the answer given says that the Ministry of Health is going to look at it directly, I would argue that in looking at some of the aspects of affect of glyphosate on our forests, and indirectly then on our watersheds, on our biodiversity, on our ecosystems, it would be hard-pressed to not find an affect on human health as well. So my only urging would be that that we take a look at both the indirect as well as the direct, which were the aforementioned by the Minister. Having said that, I'm going to deviate just a little bit and take a different tact here on transportation. So the vast majority of emissions related to transportation, I know, there we go. My spouse always says, Renee, can you just give me a heads up before you switch topics? I did. That was a good transition, right? But the vast majority of emissions come related to transportation come from essential travel. What initiatives are available outside of electric vehicle subsidies at this time?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and to the member, thank you for the question. In addition to passenger vehicle, light-duty passenger vehicle rebates, there are also home and workplace EV charger rebates. There is investment in public charging and hydrogen fueling. And perhaps as or more importantly, I would say, a significant investment by the province of British Columbia and a commitment to raise the provincial share of investment in public transit infrastructure to 40%, working with TransLink and BC Transit to invest in a range of public transit expansion and opportunities so that people can travel safely, affordably, and conveniently outside of a car in public transit, whether it is SkyTrain technology, expansion of bus services, exploring other forms of rapid transit. There is also significant investment in transportation mode shifting and active transportation programs and infrastructure around the province by this government in collaboration with the municipalities and the transportation agencies. And we also have a focus on developing and linking housing and development to the build out of transportation, public transportation infrastructure so that people can live, work, and play in more compact communities. This will obviously take time to achieve, but we have begun the work. We're committed to continuing the work so that people not only don't have to travel great distances at great cost for fuel if they've yet to make the transition to a zero-emission vehicle, and it's so they can have to travel smaller distances. They can do it through public transit, and they have more time to spend with their families by reducing their travel distances.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the Minister for that answer. All of what the Minister just shared or made mention of typically is more in an urban setting. Could the Minister enlighten me as to how those initiatives would be used in a rural setting?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like, if I could, for the member to clarify, by rural, does the member mean small towns or completely outside of towns altogether, or local government run communities?
Member.
Thank you so much, Chair. And it would be both. It would be the interaction between smaller municipalities and larger ones. Let's say, for instance, the transportation that's necessary to go from north all the way back down to the Lower Mainland, as well as some of those emission reducers within smaller communities in and of themselves.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Well, whether it is for people who are seeking to get around in small communities, or for small communities that are looking for ways to reduce emissions, whether it be through transportation or other means, but the member is focusing on transportation, and we may have a chance to talk about this later. We have the Clean BC Clean Communities Fund, which is funding from both the federal and provincial government. We also have a substantially increased local government climate action program, which for small communities is going to mean huge increases in the amount of money they used to see over the CARROT program. EV rebates are available, as are EV charger rebates, everywhere around the province. We've taken the provincial sales tax off used EVs to make them more accessible to people, and our plan is to complete our BC Electric Highway by 2024, which will make it easier for people to get from A to B to C to D to E with an electric vehicle, and our plan is to have 10,000 EV charging stations around the province by 2030.
Member.
Thank you so much, Chair. And to the Minister, how will we have enough power to suffice for all of the increased electric vehicles?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So under the Clean BC plan, electrification is one and a very important and primary measure to reduce emissions, particularly in transportation and home energy, but there are others. Biofuels is one of them, and energy efficiency, of course, is a key one. Having both efficient transportation and efficient building envelopes that reduce the demand for electricity overall. In BC Hydro's integrated resource plan, they include a scenario in which aggressive electrification increases electricity demand that would be consistent with the Clean BC roadmap. And BC Hydro has developed a contingency resource plan that would allow it to meet this increase in demand, and identified several near-term actions to ensure that it would have the ability to act on the plan. And that plan is currently before the BC Utilities Commission, and the BCUC will decide after some public process whether to approve this latest integrated resource plan from BC Hydro.
Member.
Thanks so much, Chair. And to the Minister, what portion is Site C Dam of the BC Hydro plan before the BCUC?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think, and I say this understanding that Energy Mines and Low Carbon Innovation has already been through the estimate process, so I'll do my best to answer it. The exact technical details, like what percentage Site C might form of a contingency plan by BC Hydro, is probably best answered by Emily, and they might be able to with a letter. But I would say Site C is a given. It's under construction. It's going to be completed. BC Hydro is already accounting for it as a source of energy, so to that extent, it wouldn't be the central piece of a contingency plan. But to the extent that that previously it wasn't foreseen that Site C power would be needed entirely before around 2030, that some percentage of Site C power could fill contingency or emergency use under an aggressive electrification program such as that envisioned in Clean BC.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So my line of questioning, and I'm going to harken back to a couple answers ago from the minister, in which I asked about more of the smaller communities. And I'll even include the community of Kelowna, because I have some available numbers from the city of Kelowna, in that currently, new developments are not being allowed to electrify every parking stall in some of the multifamily units. Now, there's been some attempts to change that through bylaw, but unfortunately, they didn't consult with the utility company, who is the driving force behind the limiting of those stalls. So again, I'll ask, does the minister believe that the electricity planning that is being done will be sufficient for the need of the electric vehicles that is shown in the plan for the Roadmap 2030 reduction in GHGs on transportation? Sorry.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And as the, first of all, with respect to vehicle charging stations in new buildings, as the member herself has acknowledged, the City of Kelowna is in a position to actually address that issue, and I certainly hope they will. With respect to the accessibility of enough electricity to meet the demands of the Clean BC Roadmap to 2030, it is my understanding that BC Hydro's contingency plan, which is also known as the accelerated electrification scenario before the BC Utilities Commission, is built around the Clean BC Roadmap to 2030 and meeting those demands.
Member.
Chair, and thank you to the Minister for the answers to the questions. At this time, I'm going to actually turn it over, I guess 1 minute early, to the leader of the third party, who has some questions today.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and always good to be on our feet here in these moments. I was waiting for my colleague, but I will get underway with some local area questions to start with. The Minister is aware of this, but just outline a little bit for the background. I have some constituents in Cowichan who purchased a house and sadly discovered that it was the site of an enormous amount of what appears to be excessive illegal dumping, including of hazardous waste. I've visited the site myself, and it is quite something to see up close and personally. They were unaware when they purchased the property that a previous owner had run a hazardous waste disposal company called Broad Demolition that had received numerous contracts on the island, including from Ucluelet, Duncan, Delta, Victoria, Salt Spring Island, and the Comox Valley. Investigations and FOI requests revealed that this operator was not actually licensed to transport asbestos waste or any other hazardous waste materials, although he was awarded contracts from various local governments to do exactly that. There's evidence of large amounts of waste disposed on this property, and other members of the local community and neighbors further validate the notion that the dumping and burning was occurring on this property. There are some significant burn sites that contain levels of lead well beyond the allowable limit, and levels of arsenic at 5 times the allowable concentration in several areas of this property, which was marketed as a place where you can grow food. There are fruit trees. It's in this very quiet residential area. Certainly in no way, shape, or form did these residents have any idea that they were purchasing a property that was literally filled with waste, some of it hazardous. It is located uphill from several other residential properties. It is in close proximity to a water source. And there's strong evidence of waste. The actual material in many places matches material that came off of sites that this demolition company had tendered for, and was alerted in some of that tendering for having suspiciously low quoting on jobs to remove waste. The current residents have spent hundreds of hours, significant sums of money to develop a case in court against this. But what I want to ask the Minister about is the most relevant legislation to this issue is the Hazardous Waste Regulation and Environmental Management Act. Strong legislation guides the process of hazardous waste disposal if that legislation is followed. And my first question to the Minister is, how would the Minister characterize the provincial capacity to enforce correct disposal of hazardous waste and recourse for the incorrect disposal of waste?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And to the member, thank you for the question. The first question was, do we have the capacity to respond? And I would say that we rely on the RAP line, the 1-800 line, for people to report suspected pollution, as well as wildlife violations, et cetera. And then we get over 1,000 complaints related to illegal dumping pollution a year. And we respond to those using a risk-based approach. So if the report is a suspicion of hazardous materials that could impact human health or water, et cetera, that would be high on the risk criterion. And conservation officers and or Environmental Protection Division staff would respond, and they have the powers to investigate in that case. Do we have enough staff to be constantly in the field monitoring? I would say I'm not sure what number would be adequate because you could have hundreds of people out in the field throughout the province, and if they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, we would still rely on people who happen to witness either an illegal dump or what they consider to be evidence of an illegal dump to report that. But we are responding to complaints based on a risk-based approach. It's also important to note that as the member has pointed out, authorizations to dispose of materials are required, and it is the responsibility of a contractor, local government or otherwise, to know that the person they contract to is in fact authorized to perform the work, has an authorization permit, as well as has the proper training that's evidenced by a license to actually carry out the work. And all of this is controlled by regulation. Local governments, of course, in certain instances may have bylaw enforcement powers as well. The member asked about what is our potential recourse, and the initial recourse could be a stop work order followed by separate orders to remediate damage and to change practice if this was in fact somebody with an authorization and a license. In addition to that, administrative monetary penalties could come into play, or in certain circumstances, court action.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to Minister, just specifically, can you clarify whether the province has the jurisdiction over the transportation of hazardous materials?
Minister. Member.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So if there is evidence of a contractor that has contracted for the removal, transportation, and disposal of hazardous waste, and they aren't actually licensed to do that, what role does the province play at that point?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So the enforcement activity that the government can take is what I previously mentioned. It stop work order, followed by the possibility of penalties and/or court action.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in this case, where citizens have found themselves in a situation where the actions of the previous owner of a property were not aligned with provincial regulations, were not aligned with the legislation, what recourse should those citizens have?
Minister.
Chair, so first of all, before we go much further in these questions or answers, I want to say I don't want anything I say to be taken as disregard or taking lightly or disrespect for the very real challenges and disappointments and cost being incurred by the family that the leader of the third party is referencing. It is real, and it's disturbing. It's my understanding that that this issue is part of some ongoing legal proceedings. At the moment, despite investigations by staff in the Environmental Protection Division, we don't have any data, reports, or evidence that can link the materials on site which are hazardous to actions by the specific contractor being referenced by the member. If we had it or should we get it, we would proceed. In the meantime, one of the things we are doing more generally outside this case is having discussions with regard to the ministries responsible for administering public disclosure on property sales, whether we can expand the information included in those disclosures to include the requirement for disclosure of material having been disposed of or dumped on a property, and we're in those discussions currently.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I assure the minister I will keep him apprised of further developments, but I think that there's a great deal of evidence, and I'm not sure when he mentions that an environmental protection officer, I'm not sure if he means that somebody actually went to the property or not. I don't think that happened, but I will continue to raise this. I do want to move to another soil issue. Seems to be the abundance of what I've got in Shawnigan. But so this is the approval of the spill prevention, the final closure plan for Cobble Hill Holdings up in Shawnigan Lake. I'm sure most people are very familiar with how long this has been going on, but this was issued by the minister in 2019, and there were 12 very clear conditions that were laid out in this final closure plan, which at the time named South Island Resource Management, South Island Aggregates, Martin Block, Michael Kelly, Cobble Hill Holdings, and Altera Constructions. Those name parties have changed. I'm curious as to why that has happened, but mostly I'm curious about the fact that that there would be monthly, this is condition number 11 of the final closure plan, there would be monthly sampling of surface water. There would be regular sampling of well water, and as the minister, I'm sure, knows, there have been no updates of these requirements of sampling of water at this site. And very little information from the ministry about why that hasn't happened, and no real sense of what the consequences are for this company and these people for not following the very clearly laid out conditions of this closure plan, which, again, the minister had a 194-page reasons for decision, which recognized that the community did not have a lot of faith or a lot of confidence that these conditions would be met, because track records are very telling. So my first question to the minister is, what are the consequences for these conditions not being met, particularly around water sampling, and when can the community expect to see the regular water samples that were required as part of this closure plan? And what I'm very much hoping not to find out is that because we've passed the time frame during which these conditions weren't met. Now we're just going to move on and not have those conditions of the first and second year of this closure plan be met.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. So one of the questions that was asked was why, it wasn't really a question, but the member said that she wasn't sure why the named parties were changed, and they weren't actually changed. One of the named parties was removed, and the named party that was removed was a contractor that was doing the work, and when that contractor completed the work and the work was reviewed, it was deemed to have been done satisfactorily. So that's why that particular named party was removed. With respect to the monthly sampling of surface water and the regular sampling of well water, staff are reviewing these samples. There's been some short staffing because there was quite a diversion of staff from not only the Environmental Protection Division but other ministries to deal with debris and consequences of the atmospheric rivers, so found ourselves a bit short-staffed, but that review is happening. We expect the samples to be posted in about 3 weeks for public and community review. Investigation is ongoing, and there is non-compliance discovered, and the consequences are, as I mentioned previously in the other instance, orders, administrative penalties, and the potential of court action. And if the member would like a full and detailed briefing from the Assistant Deputy Minister Laurel Nash, we can arrange that.
Member.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think a full briefing would be helpful. I'll just leave it at this before I pass it over to my colleague. It's, at its essence, the issue with Cobble Hill Holdings and this contaminated landfill site has been one of community losing trust in the provincial government to ensure that the community's well-being, the water protection are at the forefront of decision-making and actions that are taken. And I can just let the minister know and his staff that the way that things have unfolded since the closure plan was approved has done nothing to help restore that trust. That trust remains broken because, as has continued with these operators, conditions aren't met, deadlines aren't met, and it seems that the rate of action from the ministry, from government, and the consequences do not match the implications of this, and frankly, never really have. And so the best time to start to restore and regain that trust is always right now. But I think it's really important to understand that the way things have unfolded in the last 5 years have not been in a manner that have provided a sense that things have shifted significantly at the Ministry of Environment when it comes to the protection of a community's drinking water source. So I'll leave it with that. It's just a comment, Mr. Chair. I'll hand it to my colleague.
Recognizing the member for Stanage North and the Islands.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I've done in the brief few moments that I have left here, I've got just a couple of questions to the minister. And as I've done with other ministries, I'd just like to ask, just in following up a question that I asked the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation around the draft action plan, and noting that the minister has at least 2, maybe 3 draft actions. Just how the minister is intending on ensuring that reconciliation remains a core priority of the Ministry of Environment.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. So I think in general terms, not a week goes by where I don't have a meeting of some sort with representatives of Indigenous nations, leadership of Indigenous nations around an issue of interest to them with regard to rights and title, or the implementation of DRIPA, or specific issues that has to do with their land base, which is, I think, critically important. I'll give us one example. Last week I had a meeting with representatives of the First Nations Leadership Council around the consultation and engagement we'd had to date with them with respect to the public interest bonding strategy, and their thoughts and desires about how we could enhance that and collaborate at a deeper level. And we are proceeding to meet with them to have those discussions. But during the course of those discussions, the Leadership Council representatives referred to the work that we did in 2018 on the Environmental Assessment Act revitalization, which was one of the first priorities of the Leadership Council in their early meetings with our government. They referred to the collaborative work to revitalize that act as a high water mark of collaboration and consultation, and that they expected us to continue to meet the standard that we'd originally set. There are a range of other areas in which we work toward both reconciliation and giving life to our responsibilities under the action plan. As example, we regularly talk with nations around provincial parks. Both the I'll give us a couple of examples. The establishment of the Ice Mountain area adjacent to Mountain Adziza Conservancy with the Tultan. That was an issue of great importance to them. My parliamentary secretary and I both have as a mandate to enhance the cultural experience and cultural interpretation opportunities in BC parks by working with Indigenous nations. As the member knows, we have, and the member can be justifiably proud for drawing to my attention, we have worked with nations to recognize important traditional place names to add to or take the place of existing park names. And you know, it is, people say reconciliation is a journey, and these are all steps. In particular, with respect to BC parks and protected areas, I think the opportunities for all British Columbians in Indigenous nations playing a greater role, whether as guardians, as participating in our ranger programs, being employees within the system, in some cases taking over management or co-management of provincial parks, is all an important part of moving away from the park system as it was once envisioned, and moving toward a park system that recognizes the rights and title holders in particular areas. And it's not that they don't want the areas to be parks or protected, but these nations have very specific, and not necessarily the same, but very specific ideas about how to enhance their participation in the management of the park and the recognition of their culture, their knowledge, their history within that park. And frankly, I think that's critically important as well. I'll simply close by saying, because I'm noting the hour, that even though the responsibility for the watershed security strategy and fund has been transferred, the lead responsibility has been transferred from Environment to the new Ministry of Land, Water and Resource Stewardship, in the development of the discussion paper that is now out in public that will inform the next steps of this fund. There was significant collaboration, consultation, and engagement with First Nations, and one of the key principles of the discussion paper is that Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous participation in water governance, watershed governance, is absolutely critical to the future. Chair, with that, I move that the committee rise and report progress and ask leave to sit again.
Members, a vote is about to take place. The question is, does the committee rise, report progress, and seek leave to sit again? All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, members. The committee now stands adjourned.